You started with a thought experiment about what it would have been like if Donald Trump just did win in 20. I know a lot of folks breathed a sigh of relief when he lost, thinking that this era was over. Democrats also, I think a lot of Republicans as well. But you venture to say that actually it might have been better off for the country had he just stayed for another term.
Well, the thesis of that introduction is that Donald Trump would not have wielded power anything like what we've seen in the second term had he had a consecutive second term. And I think that's pretty impossible to argue against. You know, think of the context. 2020 election, let's say he squeezed through that election. He would have been hobbled by COVID, was still in the throes of COVID, people were dying, he would have dealt with a very difficult situation. Inflation was global. Every developed country dealt with inflation. The notion that Donald Trump's America would have been spared, obviously you can't prove it counterfactual, pretty hard to imagine. So, you know, you imagine a scenario where he's sort of limping through that term, dealing with these crises, dealing with unpopularity. You finish that term and who knows, maybe his approval rating's in the high 20s, maybe it's in the low 30s. MAGA it would be very hard to recover from that. Instead, he has 4 years where he becomes a figure of mythic proportions. I mean, the indictments enlarged him. No matter what you think about these cases, whether, you know, people think that they were strong, weak, whatever. Yeah. The effect of them is undeniable. Exactly. He grew into a larger figure than he was because he survived all of this, came through the assassination attempts, the iconic Butler standing up, raising his fist. It made him a bigger figure. And the Republican Party, we've never seen a president with such command over his party that Trump exercised in 2025. Granted, we're seeing some cracks in that now. He exercised total command over his party last year. Again, I don't think that would have been possible in a consecutive term.
So that ability to come back and to withstand all of that and be victorious in the end is why I want us to talk about the end of the book. So you finally go to the Oval Office to sit down and do an interview with him. And he tells you, despite all of your terrible, horrible fake news reporting and, you know, how wonderful he is.
Maggot.
That the only thing that you cannot argue is
that he wins every effing time, that he's survived all of, you know, they shot me, you could argue, is what he said. I was indicted. I can't even remember the exact quote, but it was giving us a hard time about coverage, and that we should tell the truth. It's time you told the truth. And we did tell the truth in this book. But that moment came at the very end of, honestly, Katie, and you know how Trump likes to give people a harder time often on social media than in one-on-one interpersonal contract.
He likes to be very charming in person.
It was a very genial hour. Now, we had tried repeatedly to get him to sit down with us for a fact-checking interview, and we made it through a portion of our fact checks in the time we had. But during that time, what really stood out to us most was, in addition to the maple trees and the ballroom column designs, was we asked him a question which was based on him talking about his own power and how powerful he saw himself. And so we asked him, has there been a U.S. president as powerful as you, in your view? And remember, we're 6 weeks into the war at this point.
2 weeks in, right?
No, it was
17 days in.
Oh, God, it was 17 days in. Sorry about that. You're right. He, instead of just answering us directly, sends his aide, Natalie Harp, who is, you know, another one of this close circle around him who feeds him with constant good news, go get the papers from The Historian, and she hands us each these 2-pagers, and he says this is from a historian whose thesis is that Donald Trump is the most powerful person to ever walk the face of the earth, not president, person. More than, and then it goes down this list, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, the Caesars, Tamerlane, Hitler, Mao, Stalin, and he's reading this, and he's clearly, there's no moral component to it. He's not talking about who they were or what they did, just that they were powerful and remembered, and that what we were supposed to take from this was that he has more because of the U.S. military, because of global communication, and because of his willing to use it. And the coda to this is that the historian was not a historian. It was Gary Player's former caddy and business associate.
But the fact that he wants to be associated with those leaders, I don't know very many people, if any at all, that want to be associated with Hitler or Stalin in any way. These are vicious, bloody leaders, dictators. Why does he like being in their company? not to try to, I know it's hard to psychoanalyze him, but what does it say to you about his goals for the next presidential cycle? 'Cause I guess that's what this leads us to. If he believes he's all-powerful and he's the most powerful person that's ever walked the earth and he always wins, there is that open question of whether he leaves office. After all, he's gilding it. He's remaking Washington. That ballroom's only supposed to be finished, you know, a couple months before he leaves office. Do you have any insight into that?
Look, you know, we talk about this a fair amount, that most points in a presidential cycle, in a lame duck term, which this is, you can see where an unpopular president's party is headed, and it's not for good, or good results on Election Day and the midterms. And then the control of the House flips, maybe control of the Senate flips, and then what follows is a lot of subpoenas and oversight hearings and so forth. If the House flips, if the Senate flips, one or the other or both, there obviously will be attempts by Democrats to do all of that. But what we haven't seen before is what happens if a sitting administration across the board does not respond to those subpoenas, does not supply witnesses. Now, we have had instances where that has happened, you know, in specific cases before, under Obama, under Trump 1, and so forth. What happens is if it's everything? Congress's abilities to actually engage in any accountability, if that's true, is pretty hamstrung. They don't have a jail in Congress. They will have to refer contempt of Congress subpoenas or referrals to the DOJ, which will be led by a Trump appointee. So we try to look
not just a Trump appointee, Trump's own former personal lawyer.
Or you know, potentially someone else like a Jeanine Pirro or who knows who else. And so,
but they won't be less loyal.
They will not be less loyal. And so we try to look at what comes next, and you know, it's sort of a black hole.
Does the Republican Party, outside of Donald Trump's own appointees, stay loyal?
Well, again, sort of an unanswerable question at this point. You are seeing the Senate operate in a slightly different way than the House, but that's largely because Donald Trump has so aggressively alienated a few senators. You know, when it turns out when you run them into retirement and defeat them and run opponents against them, you know, they don't tend to retain their loyalty. But it's also instructive. Pretty much all these people who went against him, they're out of a job after the election. So this idea that, like, Donald Trump is losing all his power, I don't know. I'd kind of question that a little bit. He's still in the Republican Party. He's still the Colossus, and he still ends people's careers. So we shouldn't get, like, too delusional about that.
I think you're right about that. General election is an open question as well. Maggie, Jonathan, guys, it's remarkable the work you do every day. This book is an opus, and my hat goes off to you. I know it's very difficult covering this administration and this person, especially for as long as you guys have been doing it, but you're unequaled.
Well, thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it.
This was great.
Regime change. I'd say go get it, but I think it's sold out everywhere. Third printing?
More coming.
You can still get the audio book and the Kindle.
And there's bookstores.
Bookstores.
Go to a bookstore.
It's coming. Guys, congratulations.